Hey everyone, this is That Guy in Hutch, and you're listening to That Podcast in Hutch. Today I brought in someone, I've been wanting to get him in for a while, and we finally got it worked out. John Donley is a governmental affairs, or quote, lobbyist with Devine, Donley, and Murray here in Topeka. And John generally, he's got a kind of a variety of clients, but I know him mostly as the ag lobbyist. He represents a lot of ag interest, and most notably their flagship client is the Kansas Farm Bureau. So John and I get to talk quite a bit about ag issues in the state, and I always find his information helpful. So I thought I'd bring him in and pick his brain a little bit and let you all listen. Thanks, John, for coming in today.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I always tell people that I'm a lobbyist and an attorney. So the reason that is because I had a great 7th and 8th grade English teacher that taught me what a double negative is. So if I'm going to be negative in one professional capacity, I need to be negative in another professional capacity. And it makes me an all right guy, is what I like to tell myself.
The double negative is a positive, right?
Yeah, right. 2 negatives make a positive. So here I am.
Well, that's one of the things I kind of wanted to start in on. You grew up on the family farm out in Ellsworth County, and so you grew up farming and ranching, and somewhere along the way you decided that I want to be an attorney. Can you talk with me a little bit about how you made that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's always a surprise. In fact, I was when I left the family farm and ranch and went to Kansas State University, I was an animal science major. In fact, I was looking at maybe becoming a veterinarian, and then Physics 2 happened and realized that probably wasn't the path for me. I then graduated with an animal science degree and went to work for the Kansas Beef Council. I kind of did some producer communication and some of the functional part of the beef checkoff program here in the state of Kansas as it relates to the assessment. From there, I actually had gotten to know my now partner, Devine. She was general counsel for the Kansas Livestock Association, and I don't know what she saw in me, but she kept pushing me to go to law school, and I thought, why not? So I was not married yet. I actually got married right before I started law school, but I was young and dumb and thought it was a good idea. So there I went to law school and actually clerked with a couple of law firms, one in Wichita and one in Salina, Kansas, during my summers. And once upon graduation, I made the decision that governmental affairs was what I wanted to do. I'd worked for the Livestock Association as an intern while I was in law school, and I was drawn to that, to this environment. I don't know why, but I was, and here I am today. So then after becoming an attorney, so I guess let me say I don't practice traditional law, but my law degree is very helpful, I believe, in what I do in governmental affairs work, and we do a little bit of legal work on the side on stuff that we really want to, mainly related to agricultural operations. So
I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, but I feel like we should unpack a little bit what drew you to this industry and saying I want a career in the Capitol building trying to convince 165 people to see things the way I'd like them to see it.
No, that's a great, very observant point. I don't know. I guess I'm crazy, but I think it's probably the people. I mean, I often tell people the thing I enjoy about the job the most is, even with people you disagree with in the State House, at the end of the day, everyone, or a vast majority of people, are well-intentioned, and they truly believe that what they're wanting to do and wanting to accomplish is the right end policy goal. And I guess that probably drew me into it. It's more of working through that process and I think watching policy develop, not only through the membership organizations, but then also through the committee process and the debate that we have in this body, while frustrating at times. I think that's probably what drew me to this insane world that we call Kansas politics and policy.
Well, because it is kind of fascinating, right? You get to see, like you said, there's the groups that have their goals and what they'd like to see in policy, but you have all these people with a slightly different idea on what they'd like to see, and you kind of mash it all together, and somewhere out of that, it ideally emerges this combination of ideas and thoughts and understanding, really understanding, if you can get to that point, that that there are different ways to solve a problem, and maybe if you incorporate those different parts, and I agree, that is, I mean, I'm just as crazy as you are because I'm still here, but yeah, it's fascinating to watch that all play out. But before you decided to be an attorney and take that route, you were looking at a career in ag. I mean, you grew up that way, and so your plan was to go back and do that, and you still do that, right? You're still on the family farm, and so you're kind of doing dual things here.
Yes, that's correct. Actually, my initial intention after deciding I didn't want to be a veterinarian, or my professor deciding I didn't want to be a veterinarian, I did actually get a decent grade, but I did not like that class. So, my intention was to eventually go back to the family operation. But I harken back to a conversation I had with my dad. Actually, I don't even know if I think I was probably out of college. It might have been when I was deciding to go to law school, and we were, talking about plans, et cetera. And we had a frank conversation about, if you really look at agriculture, the operations, and this is a little bit too broad of a brush to use, but the operations that are growing and expanding, there's usually other sources of income that are involved in those operations. And we kind of talked through it, and I did get pretty good grades and was thinking about law school. I believe that was at that time, and just decided, why not proceed with a profession that could give me the flexibility potentially to come back eventually, but also give me the security of a little bit more stable income than agriculture provides. And I think the world of the people that can survive on an agricultural operation alone, but it's a very capital intensive endeavor. And as you stated, actually, when I left the Kansas Livestock Association, we started Devine, Donley, and eventually Murray. I did move back to Central Kansas to the family farm, and I'm actually active and a partner on that operation with my with my family. I've got 3 preteen and teenage boys that are starting to outwork me, which isn't that hard. But anyways, they do a lot of the work, and my 70-something-year-old father does a lot as well. So.
It's good to have people that'll help you out, especially when you're up here during session so much. Well, we talked a little bit before we started recording, and you kind of touched on it there. The business of farming and ranching is a difficult one, and there are a lot of variables that play into that, and it's not a guarantee that somebody's going to be okay. And we were talking a little bit about different things happening in the world. For instance, right now we have what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia, and that it might be over there, but it's playing a role in what's happening in ag markets right now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
No, I think, it's a great point. I guess I'll use it as a personal example just to tie in what we had just talked about. Last Thursday, 2 weeks ago, we consigned some cattle that we have that have been grazing wheat all winter to a video auction. Long story short, the auction was Thursday. The video auction, it's kind of a new technology where a lot of people sell cattle that way. And I actually teased my dad because he actually drives down to Oklahoma City to the site where the auction's taking place to be there to watch the video auction take place. But that's another story about early and late adapters to technology. But the Thursday was the day of the sale, and of course you wake up or go to bed, I guess actually is when you'd heard that the Russian invasion of Ukraine had happened. And what that has done is create commodity prices. Russia and Ukraine are major exporters, number one of fertilizer, and also of wheat. And so grain prices the next morning when the Board of Trade opened shot up immensely. I don't remember what the numbers. I know wheat was well over $9 at that time. And that, because that is one of the input costs of feeding cattle, what we were selling was cattle that would then go on feed. So the price for those feeder cattle went down. And back to your question, it just shows the things that are totally out of your control, that you can manage everything properly, do all the right things with the technology and market your cattle correctly. But at the end of the day, you're also subject to the whims of the market. And in my worldview, that's okay. It's frustrating at times. I wouldn't want it any other way. But so then the decision is do we actually go through and sell the cattle? And we did. But I think that just shows the point that you have, that you mentioned, that there's a lot of things out of your control, and it's a tough business. I mean, it's subject to the whims of the market, and the market can be harsh at times. But like I also said, personally, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Well, talk to me a little bit about that, considering, that all these variables that play a role in farming and ranching, all the market conditions that exist that are way outside your control. Like I said, something happens halfway across the world and it messes up your whole plan. What is it about that life? What is it about that career that keeps people wanting to do it?
Yeah. We have mostly cattle, and we operate most of the things on horseback. So I guess there's the romanticism aspect of it. I think the world looks better on the back of a horse, in my view. But that's a really poor way of saying what Ronald Reagan said more eloquently. I can't remember his exact quote, but I think it's that romanticism, and it's a challenging business. There's things that aren't in your control, but at the end of the day, if you can operate your operation in a more efficient manner and continually improve, you can have a sustainable operation. And then there's also the draw to the land. That's just it's a spirit. It's a Kansan spirit as well, that we're just drawn to the land, and there's to produce something from nearly nothing, just what nature allows, is a very satisfying process. There's times where it doesn't go as planned, and that can be very frustrating. But the successes are very satisfying. So I guess maybe that would be my way to interpret why a lot of people are drawn back to that lifestyle. And as you know, you live in rural Kansas. Rural Kansas is a great place to raise a family and to live.
Yeah, no, there's nothing quite like it. And I know growing up, being able to wander outside of town and be out, in it. I lived in a tiny little town, but, being out, going out to, my Mrs. Gladden, my teacher's farm, and hanging out there, working out there. She kept me out of trouble with that. But, it's just, it is. It's just being out in the open like that. And I think it's a different, when I think about it, it's a way of life. And it's a way of life, I think, for people who have been in it or been connected to it, can't imagine doing anything else. Can't imagine going and punching a clock or on a factory floor or anything like that, even if they have to, like you said. So as you think about, talk to me about what we talk about, kind of how market conditions or current events that happen across the country affect things. But can we talk a little bit about just generally some of the changes that we've seen in agriculture over the years? I mean, talking about this idyllic life, I think there's what used to be, a family farm and everything, and it has changed over the years. It's harder for somebody with 160 acres to make that work, and the operations are bigger and they're more efficient, and there's been a lot, and it's a business. It's not like it, throw some seed in the ground and hope for the best and hope and pray for rain. There's a lot to it. What, in your time or kind of over your experience, what sort of notable changes have you seen in agriculture over the years?
Yeah, I think, precision farming is one that's made drastic changes since in my adult life, quite frankly, where you can put the seed and the fertilizer and all of the inputs in exactly the right spot to enhance your production and become a more efficient operation. I think that would probably be a major change that's happened in my adult lifetime. I mean, if you look back over the years, we went, as you said, a quarter section or an 80 and a mule and a plow. We are not there anymore. And I think that at some level, that's part of the romanticization of agriculture. There's still people, I don't think they actually think that's how it still works, but that's how they want to think it still works. A family farm today may be 30,000 acres of farm ground, a cattle feeding operation or whatever else, and an investment in an ethanol plant. That's still a family-owned operation, and while from afar it can look like, wow, that's a lot, there's also usually a lot of debt behind that as well.
Yeah.
So it's to your comment about the idyllic nature or the idyllic view of the family farm. I think it's still there. It just looks different than it used to. I think a lot of people don't understand what they like to call industrial farming or factory farms. Those are mostly family farms still. I don't like those terms naturally because I don't think they truly describe the reality, but it's and it's changed how agriculture is viewed, especially as we get the disconnect of people being further and further removed from the farm, or even rural communities. I often joke with a neighbor, friend of ours, that actually he was involved in governmental affairs back in the 70s, and they, as people get older, they tend to think that these other people that live different styles of life, that they just don't think they're normal. And we finally came to the realization one day over a beer that, we're not the normal ones, and I think that's one thing agriculture struggles with, is we live our life and we're so consumed by it that we don't understand how other people view us sometimes, and we need to do a better job of getting our message out there. And quite frankly, it's conversations like you and I always have. I mean, not that you're detached from rural Kansas, because you're not. You're part of rural Kansas, but these conversations need to happen, because I truly believe, there's some people in agriculture say that people don't know where their food come from. Well, they do know, they just don't know exactly how it's done, and that's where we could improve. When you open up a conversation of the 6-year-old in Chicago doesn't know where chocolate milk comes from. Well, you're not opening yourself up to a very friendly environment. We need to approach that a little bit differently.
And of course, that's the most extreme of the examples, right? When we say there's but it is true that people, they know it comes from a farm, or they know that it comes from agriculture work, but maybe don't fully understand all that goes into that. And one of the things I always bring up, you talked about precision ag, and I know I visited a farm out in western Kansas that they're looking at satellite images, and they're applying the right kind of fertilizer only in the places that need it, and they can look at that and see what the field needs. So they're not overusing inputs, they're not overusing fertilizer. There's a lot that I'm seeing coming up with soil probes, knowing what soil temperature is, and there's a lot of experimentation going on with cover crops, and can you use that to reduce water consumption? Can you use cover crops to reduce soil temperature? Just a lot that goes into that to make sure that, and that's one thing that's always struck me is in some circles the idea is that industrial agriculture is wasteful and inefficient. But what I think, if you really get into the details of it, what you see is a highly efficient operation that's trying to preserve resources, trying to use as little inputs as possible, and trying to recycle and reuse as many things as they can.
No, I think that's a great point. And I would make the argument that many of the things you just mentioned, whether it be cover crops or soil probes, et cetera, at the end of the day, that not only does it improve the environment and the environmental footprint, but the economics also improve as well. So I would make an argument that the best way to make environmental progress is to create the economic signals to encourage that type of activity. And I think that's what we're doing. I mean, politics come to play at some level too, and there's always ebbs and flows and pushing and pulling going on. But at the end of the day, I think what you've seen with agriculture over the last century, or more than a century even, is you've seen that the economics will eventually get us to where we're doing things in a more environmentally friendly manner. And it's a challenge getting there at times, and sometimes the rhetoric and the dialogue is somewhat missing. I go back to, there needs to be more conversations like this and fewer conversations on paper being traded back and forth in lawsuits, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing, because there is sometimes at least the perception is there's a pretty big gap between rural America, urban America, rural Kansas, and urban Kansas. But really, particularly in a state like Kansas, these things are interconnected, right? I mean, a lot of activity that happens in cities is supported by some of the agriculture activity. And I mean, aside from me and you sitting down and having a conversation, what are some things that we might want to do to, I guess, increase that understanding? Because for me, that's always what it's about. It's like, can we increase the understanding between people who have different points of view?
Well, I'm sure this podcast is going to get many hits and be
millions
spread over the world. So I guess this is our start. That's a great question. I don't know that I have a good answer to that, honestly. I think honest conversation is the obvious starting point. And quite frankly, I don't think this just applies to agriculture, but toning down the rhetoric a little bit at times would probably be helpful. And that's probably on both sides. As politics come into things, especially on these policy discussions, I think it drives the rhetoric to a level that is not healthy for good discussion right now. And that's a much broader statement than just agriculture, obviously. So I guess that's what I think would help bridge that divide, because that divide's not going away. I mean, you can see population trends, and there's going to be more people in urban areas and fewer people in rural areas. Although there's some people would say there's a little bit of that flowing back into the rural areas, but I'll believe it in 10 years when I see it. I'll put it that way. So I guess to just open those conversations and from the agriculture perspective, producers out there need to realize that it's not like it was 30 years ago in the legislature where 40% or whatever percent of the representatives in the state of Kansas were farmers. I think we could probably count what I would consider farmers on one hand in the state legislature. And that changes your voice. That changes the nature of the discussion. And I know that ties it back more to politics than just the general question that you had, but I think it's a microcosm of society, and we're going to be faced with these discussions and faced with this challenge moving forward. And quite frankly, I think the onus is probably on rural Americans and rural Kansans to utilize our voices to explain what we do and why we enjoy rural Kansas, and why our urban neighbors need to have an appreciation for that and understand where we're coming from. So it comes down to conversations like this at the end of the day.
As you were talking, I thought, there's been kind of a bigger push in the last, I would say maybe decade or so, to create some agritourism businesses. Do you think things like that help bringing people out to a farm and seeing the operation and identifying that this isn't a thing, it's people doing a thing? And because they're doing that thing, I get to enjoy this and have this good weekend or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great activity. Agritourism's number one. It's an economic growth point that we can utilize for speaking of outside income to keep the farming operation afloat. There's been some very successful ventures. I think those are good. I think the challenge is I always tease, I'll go back to my dad. He's kind of a grumpy old guy sometimes, but I always tease him that maybe he should open a pumpkin patch just so he can be around people more. And he grumbles a little bit and we all get to laugh at his expense. So I guess agritourism may not be for everyone, but I think it's an opportunity, and it subtly tells agriculture's voice. I think we always go, the kids are getting a little older, we don't go as much, but to a pumpkin patch every fall. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, while it's, the fun is why we go. It's for the slides and the pumpkin projectile thing, whatever you shoot.
Oh yeah, the sling. You either have a pumpkin sling or a pumpkin cannon.
Yeah,
right?
Cannon. There you go. That's
I love the pumpkin cannons.
so that's why that's the fun part that you get to go see. But there's always things involved there that explain agriculture, and I think that has value to people that generally wouldn't see it. So.
Well, and that made me think. Another thing that's probably one of the more beings from Hutchinson. I go to the fair every year, and the Farm Bureau always has a big ag display there, and kids love it. And I think things like that seem to be a pretty effective way to show kids, particularly kids who live in the city, like, oh, this is a tractor, this is how this all works, and things like that just keep telling that message over and over that create the connection between those two different groups of people.
Yeah, I think that's I think you're probably AgriLand is one of the things you're talking about at the state fair, and I have a different perspective on that because I used to have to work that right out of college, and it was a slog at times, but it is very valuable, and I'm glad they do that. And the Foundation for Ag in the Classroom, Kansas Farm Bureau, all the respective commodity commissions and other associations that are involved in that. I think it's a great effort, and the state fair in general is just a good way to get the entire state of Kansas to see some of what agriculture has to offer. So I'm a big supporter of the state fair. There's times I don't want to be around that many people, but that's just a personality flaw.
Well, and you're right. When you have to work the fair and you're there for 12 hours or 15 hours, it is. I've worked booths there before, and it gets tiring at
Yes.
the end of the day. Well, one of the things I was thinking about, and I've mentioned this to people before, if you really want to understand how things have changed over the years regarding ag, I don't know if you know this or not, but I have a weird hobby of collecting old school books, and they all. I always, if I can find a school book that's like from the early 1900s or even late 1800s, I always snag them at used bookstores. But one of the things that always fascinates me is that the math lessons in those books are almost always based around agriculture. I mean, the math question is, how many bushels of grain can you fit in a wheat truck this size? And that's how they used to teach math. It was so the state was so based and steeped in agriculture that when they're teaching kids algebra, they're using or simple math, they're using familiar things like wheat production to teach them about it.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that about you, but I guess you could probably actually know what a rod is. Not many people know what a rod is. I have to go to the old school books, I guess. But I collect statute books from the past, and my goal is to get the current statute book down to the size of a 1912 Kansas statute book. I'm not succeeding.
Good luck with that. They keep adding new copies every year. We're in my office, and I've got my statute books up here, and every year they come throw a few new volumes in here.
Yeah, your collection may be more satisfying than mine because I don't think I'll achieve my goal.
Yeah, we seem to think we need to do something every year, and probably some years we don't need to do a whole lot. Well, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, we cover a lot of ground on agriculture, and I wanted to stay at this level here. The other thing about agriculture I think is worth mentioning is we paint it with kind of a broad brush and say agriculture, but there's a lot of pieces within agriculture, right? I mean, there's the veterinary part of it. There's the farming, but even within farming, there's a lot of different things that people farm, and talk about that, the complexity of that a little bit, and the interconnectedness of it, because agriculture isn't just agriculture; it's a lot of pieces that make up a whole.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, and from the representation of Kansas Farm Bureau, I mean, they are the broad agricultural organization. You have the Soybean Association, Corn Growers Association, Livestock Association. So I think in Kansas Farm Bureau, you really see that the broad nature of agriculture, and their goal is to be the overall general voice for agriculture. So, as all of those little different sectors of the industry interact and relate to each other, there's obviously some things, that a swine producer in Cherokee County might think differently about an ethanol plant than, say, a corn producer in Brown County. That's probably not the best example, but so there's a balancing act from a policy development standpoint on how you deal with all of those things. But more specifically to your point is, the other part that often is lost in the state of Kansas is the secondary and the tertiary markets that are created in businesses. We've got Cargill Meat Solutions located in Wichita. I mean, that's a huge operation. You've got different fertilizer production facilities. You've got sunflowers. You name it. There's just so many different aspects of it. It's a very complex industry, and how it all interrelates sometimes is hard to understand, especially as you deal with the market forces and how that all the interplay works. But at the end of the day, I am a believer that as all of that interrelates, I think if you just let the systems work, we've proven that we can have good results. We may need to tweak things here or there to encourage different activities, but in general, that interplay eventually feeds its way through the entire system. So that's an inartful response to your comment, but
well, one of the things I was thinking about too is that just the kind of explosion in the last few years of like software companies and technology that are really tied to this precision ag, and I'm thinking about the Dragon lines that when you see a irrigation system, you used to see this big thing is just spraying all over, and now you don't really see that much anymore. You see these it's dropping the water right above the plant in most cases. And I think that's been pretty widely adopted anymore, hasn't it?
Yeah, that definitely has. And you'll even see some subsurface drip irrigation systems where it's just all piped under the ground and then soaks in through the soil, so there's no evaporation at all. I mean, obviously economics once again comes into effect, what can work economically, and depends on the farm in many situations. But you might bring up a good example on software and then the technology side and the growth that's there. There's a gentleman that I attended Kansas State University with that started a company out in northwest Kansas that has really done well, just going to precision agriculture and just the software and the equipment to do what you need to do to place that fertilizer and that seed in the exact spot that you want it. So yeah, the technology advances are immense, and we're not going to talk many specific issues, but rural broadband's a great point that I think everyone's in favor of, and not just rural broadband, just broadband in general, and making sure we have access everywhere. There's portions in urban areas that don't have adequate internet. So that's one of those things that I think policymakers can join forces on, both urban and rural, and get positive results. So, and it's absolutely necessary as technology improves. That's going to only be more and more necessary. So,
and that technology, and having good broadband in these rural areas, and like you said, in urban areas too, it really is, everyone needs it now. But for agriculture, it allows this precision ag to happen, and that allows kind of an increase in capacity and a reduction of expenses, less pollution, things like that, right?
Correct.
All of that's connected.
Absolutely.
Well, before I let you out of here, because we covered a lot of ground here, I have one question I try to ask everybody, and we may have hit it already, but I'll ask it. What's one thing that you wish people understood about Kansas agriculture that they might not know if they've never been connected to it or lived on a farm or worked on a farm?
Wow, that's a great question. The one single thing that I wish people knew, I guess what I would say is that agricultural producers are doing what they love and trying to do it in the best manner possible for the environment, for the sustainability of their operations, and the sustainability of agriculture. And at the end of the day, what they're doing is truly providing that food and the fiber and in some senses some of the fuel for the world. And I think that's a very noble cause that sometimes gets lost in the discussion of what is a family farm and what's factory farming and all of these different things. But at the end of the day, these producers truly care, and I honestly believe it's a noble cause that they're working towards. Look, there's things that can be improved, and we need to continue to have that dialogue, but their heart's in the right place. So that's what I would say.
That's a good answer. I like that, man. I think that too. So, well, John, thanks for taking some time. I know we both have busy schedules up here, but I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and visit with me today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always great to visit with you.
Yeah, I hope we get to do it more.
Thanks.
Take care. I'd like to thank a few of the people who've helped make that podcast in Hutch possible. My son Mitchell Probst wrote and recorded the music for the show. Jenny Brigette put together some great graphics and promotional art. And Chris Acker helps overcome my mistakes to produce a great sounding product every episode. That podcast in Hutch is made possible through a collaboration between the Hutchison Arts and Culture Collective and Salt City Sound. They're working to bring resources and infrastructure to support art, music, and storytelling in our community. If you have an idea for your own podcast, reach out to them at podcasts@saltcitysound.net. If you enjoy that podcast in Hutch, be sure to subscribe and share it with all your friends. You can also help support this production by subscribing to thatguyinhutch.substack.com or by emailing me at thatguyinhutch@gmail.com to learn about sponsorship opportunities. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next week.
A Salt City Sound production.